Friday, September 19, 1969. Roanoke police are called to the scene of a stabbing at the Wet Pet store. A 32-year-old woman had been stabbed 21 times in the neck, and was also apparently beaten with a blunt instrument. Thelma Lipscomb Lamb's body was found in a back room, bound and gagged laying on a cot. Mrs. Lamb was a mother of 2 children, a boy 8 and a girl 10 years old, and was the manager of the Wet Pet store. Around the time of the murder, a resident saw a young man leaving rapidly through the living quarters of the store and asked the youth what he was doing there. He replied nothing and left casually. Shortly after the discovery of the body, a 16-year-old was taken into custody while driving a car a few blocks from the pet shop. Detective Lieutenant J. L. Vi met with the press.
The girl appears to be in her late 20s.
Late 20s, what can you tell us about the
move over and buy me a minute.
About the incident? How much do you know at this point?
We know very little at this point about the incident. Dr. Gable is on his way. He had to come from out of town. This is reading it to you. Progress is going along as slowly as it is.
How was she killed?
I'd rather not say at this time. Dr. Gable will have to make this announcement.
There are reports that the woman may have been stabbed half a dozen times or more in the throat or chest. Can you confirm that?
I wouldn't confirm it at this time, no, sir.
Was there gunplay involved?
I wouldn't confirm that either at this time.
Any motive established?
No, sir.
Any witnesses?
Well, we have a couple of witnesses. We're not sure they're witnesses of the actual incident. We are investigating this out.
I understand there's a possibility you may have picked up someone in conjunction with this crime. Have you anything to say on that?
I have no knowledge of this time.
The day following the murder, Paul Patterson is named as the 16-year-old suspect taken into custody. Police tell the press that they have received information that Patterson was arrested 3 years earlier for the brutal stabbing death of a 17-year-old Norfolk girl identified as Janet Bunting. Janet Bunting was stabbed in the back and in the chest in the daylight assault in a Norfolk industrial park. Rewind to August 8, 1966, 3 years prior. A then 13-year-old Patterson is committed indefinitely for the murder of Janet Bunting. The judge in the case took the action after hearing a psychiatric evaluation which showed Patterson was not psychotic but stated he needed further care and attention. Patterson was again found to not be innocent in the murder 6 months later at an appeal trial and was again committed to the Hanover School for Boys. In the closing argument, the Commonwealth's attorney stated, "He, pointing a finger at Patterson, will kill again unless you stop him." January 7, 1968, about a year after his appeal. The Hanover School for Boys, where Patterson has been committed for treatment, plans to release him. The school says that Patterson has absorbed all the school's program from which he could benefit and the state has no better treatment to offer. The Hanover Assistant Superintendent, John Boone, said Patterson has made sufficient progress to the extent he can no longer profit from this stay here. Due to the inability of Patterson's family to contribute to his boarding at an out-of-state institution, the Hanover School asked the juvenile court to arrange for Patterson's freedom. Patterson is released September of 1968. Fast forward back to June 11, 1970, the state rests its case in the trial of Patterson for the stabbing death of Mrs. Thelma Lipscomb Lamb. More than 24 witnesses took the stand to testify for the prosecution. In trial, it was revealed that Patterson voluntarily gave police the statement that he blacked out after becoming angry with the victim. The trial took an unexpected turn when Patterson switched his plea from innocent to innocent by reason of insanity. June 13, 1970, despite medical experts put on by the defense to support the mental condition of the accused slayer, Patterson was convicted June 13 of first-degree murder in the slaying of Mrs. Thelma Lipscomb Lamb, and sentenced to die in the electric chair. It took the jury just over 2 hours to reach the verdict. June 16, 1970. Paul Edward Patterson became the 10th man on death row at the Virginia State Penitentiary. Upon arrival at the penitentiary, Patterson was taken to death row, where he joined 9 other men awaiting the electric chair. October 30, 1970. A new trial is granted to Patterson by Judge Ernest Ballou, whose order said the jury was tainted and in possession of prejudicial knowledge at the time it convicted Patterson. The prejudicial knowledge the judge referred to was that Patterson had been convicted in the previous murder of Janet Bunting. Patterson was again found guilty in the first degree by Judge Wiley Wright Jr. This court is satisfied there was a direct relationship between the 2 killings, Wright said, and noted that in both cases the victims were complete strangers to Patterson. In view of his personality disorder, there is very little likelihood of any meaningful rehabilitation, Wright said. Patterson was spared the death sentence in his second trial and given life with a minimum of 20 years before the possibility of parole.
In the Roanoke area, particularly the case of Paul Patterson is one that comes to mind, that if funds had been made available to Paul to come to residential treatment at Edgemead, as the state of Virginia had suggested, maybe a couple of disasters would have been prevented. Paul was in the state care, and the psychiatrist for the state had recommended that this child be sent to Edgemead of Virginia for treatment. No funds were available at that time. If the folks responsible could realize how much money is going into Paul's trial and how much money will go into keeping Paul in a penal setting all of his life, if just one little bit of those funds had been made available for treatment for that child, perhaps disaster would have been prevented. It costs $5,000 a year to keep a child in reform school in Virginia. 85% of the children that go into our reform schools, after they leave, they come back because of law violations. I think if our society can realize that if we go all out for intensive psychiatric, psychological help for these children, maybe we're really, in the long run, making an economical move in saving lives and saving money.
December 27, 2016, 46 years after his last sentencing, the date Paul Edward Patterson was again released. It is reported that Patterson petitioned for parole for many years, being denied each time. In April 2015, Patterson was denied parole for several reasons, including that the board considers you to be a risk to the community. Persistence seems to have paid off for Paul, as he was granted parole in June of 2016. The Lipscomb Lamb family was not notified by the state that Patterson was being released.